Hi everyone. I'm going to try and do some videos for you rather than just sending you the PowerPoint. Hopefully this will make it a bit easier to do the work from home. Well done to everybody who has done the work from last lesson and the booklet. Really impressed with things that people have been sending me. Last lesson you looked at functionalist views of the family, and hopefully from that lesson you can see that functionalists have a really positive view. We're going to now look at the Marxist views of the family, which is slightly more critical. Okay, so if you look at the key terms at the bottom, some of them you might know already. The first one is capitalism. Now, capitalism is the economic system that we currently have, and it's where businesses are owned by private individuals and they profit from the work that people do in their employment. We're going to look at that in a little bit more detail later, so don't worry if you're not entirely sure what capitalism is. The bourgeoisie is the rich, so the middle class who want to preserve capitalism. So the bourgeoisie think that capitalism is a really good economic system. And the proletariat are the working class, so they work for the bourgeoisie. So they are the little worker bees and the bourgeoisie are the bosses. So we're going to explore that in a little bit more detail. What has that even got to do with the family? So if you could just look at the green box on the right-hand side, I've put there in bold, Marxists believe society is based on inequality between the rich and poor, and they believe that the rich exploit the poor. Now, the word exploit, that means when you take advantage of someone or something. So Marxists are essentially saying that the rich take advantage of the poor, or the bourgeoisie take advantage of the proletariat. They exploit them. So do you think that this is correct? So that first question, do you agree with the Marxist perspective? Do you think rich people exploit poor people in our society? The second question, can you think of any examples that support their ideas? Can you think of any ways that rich people in our society today exploit poorer people? And can you think of any ways that they are wrong? So that third question, because Marxists are not necessarily correct. Do we think that actually there are ways the rich help the poor? So that's just something for you to think about. Do you agree or not? So I want you to think about an Apple factory worker. So we know that Apple makes lots of money. We know that Apple makes their products in other countries. And we know that they probably do this because it's cheaper to make products in other countries. You don't have to pay workers in other countries as much money as you do in the UK. So if you think about a factory worker in China, they probably earn less than minimum wage. But when you think about an iPad, so the things that they're actually making, they sell for a lot more money. So who gets the profit? Who actually benefits from this? Can the factory worker even afford an iPad? And is this fair? If you're working on less than minimum wage and you can't even afford the thing that you spend all day making, is that really fair? Ultimately, the profits from these kind of products like Apple iPhones and iPads, the profits go to the bosses, and they're the ones that make the most money, but they don't do most of the production of the goods that they sell. So Marxists think this is unfair. They think we live in a capitalist society where the bourgeoisie, so the bosses, own the means of production, which is like all the factories, and they make profit by exploiting the proletariat. And this creates a conflict between the two classes. So remember, our bourgeoisie are the bosses, they're exploiting our proletariat, and there's conflict. And that conflict is really based on, is it fair? The workers always will want more money and the bosses will always want more money. And the bosses will always be thinking of ways in which they can further exploit us. So I just want to pause here and make sure that we are really clear about the difference between the bourgeoisie and proletariat. So I've got some statements on the left-hand side, and I want you to tell me or think for yourself, are these statements examples of bourgeoisie or proletariat? So the first statement I put there, are exploited by the bourgeoisie. So this one is obviously a statement that links to the proletariat. We know the proletariat get exploited by the bourgeoisie. I'll just do the second one for you as well, and then you can do the rest. You pause the video and you can just work through the others yourself. So the second statement, the owners of the production, so who owns all the factories, who owns all the business, who owns all the land, that's obviously the bourgeoisie. So the bourgeoisie are the owners of production. So just pause the video now and see if you can come up with the answers for the others, and then I'll quickly run through them. Okay, so the third one, who makes profit? So we know it's the bourgeoisie that makes profit. Who exploits the proletariat? The bourgeoisie. Who generally earns the lower salary? The proletariat. Who is usually upper or middle class? The bourgeoisie. Who has wealth and money? The bourgeoisie. Who does not own the means of production? Proletariat. And who are working class? The proletariat. So obviously you can just self-assess those and check that you've got the correct answers, and maybe think about, if you did get some wrong, why is it that you had that misconception? And if it's not clear, you can obviously drop me an email. So do you think the bourgeoisie exploit the proletariat? Is it fair that some people earn more money than others? Now, some people would say, well, obviously it's fair that some earn more money than others because some of us do more important jobs than others. If you think about a doctor, particularly at the moment, they have a very important role in society. And so it makes sense that they get paid more than perhaps somebody who has a less important role. Then you have to think as well, a cleaner, for example, doesn't get paid very much money, but actually they have a very important role in society. If we didn't have cleaners, we would, have a society that wouldn't be able to run well. So why don't they earn as much money? Is it because of the level of qualifications that they have or don't have? So it's not quite a straightforward answer. And obviously you can come to your own judgment on your own. So Marxists think that the function of the nuclear family is to support and maintain capitalism. And that's why they're very critical of the family, because Marxists don't like capitalism. They think capitalism is bad because it creates inequality. So they're very critical of anything that supports capitalism. And they also think that the functionalist view is very positive, and it's too positive. It ignores some of the bad things that families cause. So I'm just going to talk you through a summary of what Marxists believe. So on the left-hand side, these are the 4 things that Marxists really say about the family. So I'm going to go through the first one, the inheritance of private property. So Marxists think that private property is a problem in families. They think that private property that gets handed down from generation to generation leads to the rich staying rich and the poor staying poor. If you imagine a rich family, when the parents die, they pass on all their money and their houses down to their children. So it's very easy for the wealth to stay in the family. And if you're from a poor family and there's nothing to pass on, then it makes sense that that family then remains poor. It's more difficult for them to become rich. So Engels, who is the name of the sociologist who talks about this, he says that monogamy, so being in a relationship with one other person, and marriage have become essential in today's society because, families want to make sure that they're passing their wealth and their property down to their children. And the only way that men can be sure that their children are theirs, as in biologically theirs, is to have a monogamous marriage. And that means that their children are going to be their heirs to their property. So, that word there, heir, you've probably heard of in history. It's just when we pass something down, who is the rightful owner. So what Engels is essentially saying is property is passed down from generation to generation, and this leads to the rich staying rich and the poor staying poor. Now, if you are wanting to do the challenge task, what I suggest you do is pause the video and you can have a look at the questions on the right-hand side. I'm not going to go through them in this lesson, and we'll touch on those another time. So the second one, the family as a unit of consumption. This means that families are seen as consumer units. So a consumer is somebody who buys stuff. And families are consumers because they buy things for the family, things that you need to live as a family. So housing, cars, food, etc. Holidays. Remember, we watched those Jet2 adverts in class. You can see how the advertisers are really targeting families there because they know that families are consumers. Capitalism needs families to buy things so that the rich, the bourgeoisie, can make a profit, and companies will target families through advertising. So the name of the sociologist who talks about this is called Zaretsky. The third one, primary socialization. So remember, primary socialization is the process of learning norms and values. Remember, it happens at home between ages sort of 0 to 5. But Marxists believe that family teaches norms and values that lead to an acceptance of capitalism. So, for example, it teaches us to accept hierarchy and inequality as being normal. So if you think about our families, they teach us that it's normal and acceptable for us to have a boss when we're older, for us to have a head teacher or teachers who tell us what to do when we're at school. And also there's a hierarchy in the family. Usually there's a head of the household. In the past, it was always the man, the husband. Now it's, it depends. Usually it's the person who earns the most money because they tend to make the most decisions about the family. But we accept from our families that there is a sense of hierarchy. And Marxists say that this prepares us for capitalism. It prepares children to be exploited when they eventually go to work. And the name of the sociologist who says this is, again, Zaretsky. And the last one, raising the next generation of workers for free. So Marxists think that the family raises workers for free, particularly women. So women, traditionally have the housewife role. They usually have the child rearing role, cooking role, cleaning. And paid workers rely on this unpaid domestic work to be done so they can go out to work each day. So, if you're a worker, you rely on somebody to do your cooking, cleaning. Now, you might be thinking, well, this sounds a bit old-fashioned, and it is, and that will come on to criticisms later. But essentially, Marxists say that the women tend to stay at home, they take care of all the housework, the mothers raise the next generation of workers for free, and they support workers for free by doing their domestic work and also emotionally supporting them. So when the husband comes home from work and he's had a stressful day, it's the mother's role to make sure that he's okay and so that he can go back out to work the next day. So again, that was Zaretsky who said that. So only 2 names to remember for this topic so far. So you probably already thought of some criticisms. Some of it probably doesn't sound right. So the first criticism is that the theory only focuses on the nuclear family. So, from what we just read, it sounded very traditional, didn't it? Man going out to work, woman staying at home. That's because Marxist ideas are all based around the nuclear family. And we can say that's a bit outdated now because, as we know from what we did in class, there's more diverse family types now. Secondly, we can say that it assumes men are performing the instrumental role. Remember, the instrumental role is the breadwinning, going out to work role, and women are performing the expressive role. We can say that gender roles are no longer like this. In some cases they are, but increasingly men and women are doing both roles. And so we can say that their ideas are a bit outdated. Thirdly, we can say it's a bit too negative. And it actually ignores that most people are very happy with their family life, and actually their families meet their emotional needs. So some people find the Marxist view a bit daft because it seems to make out that the family is a really negative institution. It's negative because it helps perpetuate inequality and make inequality worse. But actually people like being in families. And lastly, Marxism only really focuses on class differences. It ignores gender and ethnicity in its explanation of families. So it touches on gender a little bit when it talks about the roles, but it doesn't really highlight that actually those kind of roles might advantage men over women. So we can criticise it just for focusing on class only. So I'd like you now, if you can, pause the video and just consider those 4 criticisms I've gone through. And just think about which one is the strongest criticism. If you were writing an essay about Marxism and you wanted to really critique them, what one of these would you use to counter-argue their perspective? It might be different for different people, so there's not really a right or wrong answer here. It's about which one you feel that you could explain fully. So here I've got a little Venn diagram. There's some statements on the next slide that we're going to very quickly look at. And then I'd like you to see if you can sort them. So here are the statements. The first one, functionalists take a consensus approach to society. Now, consensus, remember, means agreement. It's very positive. So I've put that number one, the first statement here, because it's something that is unique to functionalism. The second one, Marxists take a conflict approach, is obviously something unique to Marxism. So I would write number two in this part of the Venn diagram. So if you could now please pause the video, look through all of these statements and just write the numbers of the statements into the Venn diagram. So obviously if something applies to both theories, you're going to write it in the middle of the Venn diagram. Okay, finally, what I'd like you to do, based on what we've gone through this lesson, is to see if you can answer these two questions. So the first one, identify and explain one function of the nuclear family from a Marxist perspective. So the functions of the nuclear family are essentially all of these. Okay, so you would take one of these and you would explain it. For the second one, identify and briefly explain one criticism of the Marxist approach to the family. Again, these are the criticisms. All you have to do is take one and explain it fully. So some tips, remember to use examples. So, particularly with the 4 marker, sometimes people will give a function, but then won't really give an example, and that kind of limits your marks to 2. Remember to use key sociologists, particularly for number 1, okay? It doesn't really apply to number 2, but for number 1, you need either Engels or Zaretsky mentioned. And for number 3, give a criticism of the Marxist approach. If you can refer to a key theory, if you can. You don't have to, but it makes a stronger answer if you can. So if you could answer these 2 questions and email them to your teacher by Friday, the 1st of May, that would be great. If you get stuck, then you can just email me or Ms. Barteng and we'll be happy to answer your questions. If you want to upload your answers to the OneDrive, you can do, but I know some people have been finding that a little bit difficult. So just send us over the answers to just these 2 questions. Well done for listening. Again, remember you can go back through the video and pause if you need to, and use the video to answer the 2 questions. And I'll send a copy of the PowerPoint to your emails as well and on Show My Homework. Okay, well, that's all for this lesson. Take care. Any feedback on the lesson would be good as well. So if you've got a suggestion, you can pop it over to me. Okay, take care, keep washing your hands and stay safe. Bye.